Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
On Monday, I stood in front of your office with Adi Barkan. I told the story of my sexual assault. I told it because I recognize in Dr. Ford's story that she's telling the truth. What you are doing is allowing someone who actually violated a woman to sit in the Supreme Court. This is not tolerable.
Sexual assault survivors confront key Republican Senator Jeff Flake, prompting him to delay the vote to confirm Brett Kavanaugh as Supreme Court Justice by calling on the FBI to reopen its investigation into allegations Kavanaugh attempted to rape Dr. Christine Blasey Ford in 1982. We'll speak with Ana Maria Archila, one of those who confronted Flake in the elevator. Meanwhile, Democrats say the probe is too limited. Critics say Kavanaugh committed perjury, lying during his testimony.
The question really before the Senate should not be whether he should be elevated to a lifetime position for the next several decades, deciding cases that affect everyone, but whether he should even be on the federal bench.
We'll speak with Lisa Graves, co-director of Documented, which investigates corporate influence on democracy. And we'll talk to Professor Kimberly Crenshaw of the African American Policy Forum, who advised Anita Hill in 1991 when she accused Clarence Thomas of sexual harassment. Crenshaw says we still haven't learned from Anita Hill's testimony.
This whole two-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit. Revenge on behalf of the Clintons and millions of dollars in money from outside left-wing opposition groups. This is a circus.
This is a circus. It's a national disgrace. As far as I'm concerned, it is a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks who in any way deign to think for themselves.
Kimberly Shaw, from Clarence Thomas to Brett Kavanaugh. All that and more coming up. Kimberly Crenshaw. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The FBI is continuing its reopened investigation into Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. The focus of the probe is on allegations made by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford that Kavanaugh attempted to rape her in 1982. But the FBI has also reached out to Deborah Ramirez, a former classmate of Kavanaugh's at Yale, who says he thrust his genitals in her face during a party. The FBI probe was launched after Republican Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona announced he would not support Kavanaugh's confirmation on the floor without a new investigation into the allegations.
I have been speaking with a number of people on the other side. We've had conversations ongoing for a while with regard to making sure that we do due diligence here. And I think it would be proper to delay the floor vote for up to but not more than 1 week in order to let the FBI continue to do an investigation limited in time and scope to the current allegations that are there, and limited in time to no more than 1 week. And I will vote to advance the bill to the floor with that understanding.
Senator Jeff Flake's remarks shocked his Republican colleagues who were hoping to quickly push ahead with a full confirmation vote for Kavanaugh on the floor. Flake's move to stall the vote came just hours after he was confronted in a Senate elevator by two survivors of sexual assault.
That's what you're telling all of these women. That's what you're telling me right now. Look at me when I'm talking to you. You're telling me that my assault doesn't matter, that what happened to me doesn't matter, and that you're going to let people who do these things into power. That's what you're telling me when you vote for him. Don't look away from me. Look at me and tell me that it doesn't matter what happened to me, that you'll let people like that go into the highest court of the land and tell everyone what they can do to their bodies.
We'll speak with the woman you're listening to right now, Ana Maria Archila of the Center for Popular Democracy, later in the broadcast. The White House is now facing criticism for placing limits on the FBI probe. According to NBC News, the FBI witness list does not include Julie Swetnick, who says she observed Kavanaugh at high school parties in the 1980s, joining efforts to inebriate girls so they could be gang raped. The New Yorker magazine reports the FBI has failed to follow up with several individuals who want to speak to the FBI. Meanwhile, a friend of Brett Kavanaugh's from Yale has accused him of lying about his drinking habits in college. Charles Ludington said, quote, "When Brett got drunk, he was often belligerent and aggressive. On one of the last occasions I purposely socialized with Brett, I witnessed him respond to a semi-hostile remark, not by diffusing the situation, but by throwing his beer in the man's face and starting a fight that ended with one of our mutual friends in jail," Ludington said. A number of other of Kavanaugh's Yale classmates have made similar remarks about Kavanaugh's drinking. Last week, one of them, Kavanaugh's classmate at Yale, Louisa Gary, withdrew her support for Kavanaugh. She has been featured in an ad by the Judicial Crisis Network that has been running on television. In Indonesia, the confirmed death toll from Friday's earthquake and tsunami has reached at least 844. It's expected to rise into the thousands as rescuers are just beginning to reach some of the more affected areas on the island of Sulawesi. The 7.5 magnitude quake toppled hotels, mosques, and shopping malls in the city of Palu. Landslides buried entire nearby villages. The United States and Canada have reached a tentative deal to save NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. The new trilateral deal will be known as the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. And a victory for American dairy farmers, Canada has agreed to open part of its dairy market to U.S. imports. The new deal does not resolve a dispute over U.S. tariffs on Canada's steel and aluminum exports. The proposed deal must now be ratified by lawmakers in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Lori Wallach of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch criticized the new deal, saying, quote, "Unless there are strong labor and environmental standards that are subject to swift and certain enforcement, U.S. firms will continue to outsource jobs to pay Mexican workers poverty wages, dump toxins, and bring their products back here for sale," Wallach said. In Brazil, tens of thousands of people took part in women-led rallies in Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, and other cities Saturday to protest against the far-right presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro ahead of the October 7th Brazilian election. Bolsonaro is currently leading many polls, even though he was forced to stop campaigning after being stabbed last month. Bolsonaro is a former army officer who has openly praised Brazil's military dictatorship, which lasted from 1964 to 1985. He said he used his government housing allowance to pay sex workers, called women weak, threatened gay people with violence, and called a political opponent too ugly to rape. The theme of Saturday's protest was "Not Him."
My name is Jade, and I'm here because Bolsonaro is dangerous. He represents hatred for our country, because he represents the loss of the few rights that the people he targets, such as the black people, the indigenous people, and the LGBT community and women have conquered so far. He represents a threat to democracy in our country, a democracy that we are still building.
In news from Gaza, Israeli soldiers fatally shot 7 Palestinian protesters on Friday and injured more than 500 others taking part in a protest. The dead included 2 Palestinian boys, aged 12 and 14. Israeli soldiers have killed at least 190 Palestinians in Gaza since the Great March of Return protests began in March. Meanwhile, Palestinians in the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza have launched a general strike today to protest against Israel's new Jewish nation-state law that declares only Jews have the right of self-determination in Israel. During a rally in West Virginia Saturday, President Trump heaped praise on North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, saying the two of them have fallen in love.
When I did it, and I was really being tough, and so was he, and we would go back and forth, and then we fell in love, okay? No, really. He wrote me beautiful letters, and they're great letters. We fell in love. But you know what? Now they'll say, Donald Trump said they fell in love. How horrible. How horrible is that? So unpresidential.
In news from Burma, the families of 2 imprisoned Reuters reporters have asked for a pardon. The reporters were detained in December while they were investigating the killing of 10 Rohingya Muslim men and boys by security forces and local Buddhists in Burma's Rakhine state. On Friday, supporters of the Reuters reporters held an event at the United Nations. Speakers included their attorney, Amal Clooney.
This case is about much more than just 2 innocent men. I mean, if you care about press freedom, you care about this case because it sets a precedent. So if these people are locked up, then other people are too scared to do the kind of reporting that they do. In too many countries around the world, we're seeing autocratic regimes lock up anyone who criticizes them and use a whole host of laws to basically criminalize speech and quash dissent. And you have to fight every single time that happens.
In environmental news, the Trump administration's taken a number of steps in recent days to roll back environmental regulations and oversight. The New York Times is reporting Acting Environmental Protection Administrator Andrew Wheeler has completed a proposal to dramatically weaken a major environmental regulation covering mercury, a toxic chemical emitted from coal-burning power plants. Meanwhile, the Interior Department has proposed loosening major offshore drilling regulations that were put in place after the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil rig disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. This all comes as the EPA has announced plans to dissolve its Office of the Science Advisor, which was created to give the head of the EPA sound advice about scientific research. In immigration news, the New York Times is reporting the Trump administration has begun transferring detained migrant children from shelters across the country to a barren tent city in West Texas. The Times reports hundreds of children are being sent each week from shelters to the tent city, which currently houses 1,600 children. The U.S. government is now detaining a record 13,000 migrant children. A federal judge has ruled congressional Democrats can move forward with an anti-corruption lawsuit against President Trump. The suit accuses Trump of violating the Foreign Emoluments Clause of the Constitution by receiving payments from foreign governments through the Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C., and other establishments around the world. The Justice Department sued the state of California Sunday night, shortly after California Governor Jerry Brown signed a net neutrality bill to restore Internet rules that were rolled back by the Federal Communications Commission last year. California's Attorney General, Xavier Becerra, defended the state law, saying California will not allow a handful of power brokers to dictate sources for information or the speed at which websites load, unquote. In other news from California, Governor Brown has signed legislation requiring all publicly traded companies based in California must have at least one woman on their board of directors by the end of 2019. Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren has announced she's openly considering running for president in 2020. She spoke on Saturday in Holyoke, Massachusetts.
It's time for women to go to Washington and fix our broken government, and that includes a woman at the top. So here's what I promise. After November 6th, I will take a hard look at running for president.
And on Friday, protests were held in Dallas and New York to honor slain Texas man Botham Jean on the eve of what would have been his 27th birthday. Jean was shot dead in his own apartment last month by a Dallas police officer who's now facing manslaughter charges. Protesters decried the killing of Botham Jean.
Another black man murdered by an off-duty cop. Botham was murdered in his own home. After after Officer Amber Geiger broke into his home, thinking it was her own apartment, and shot him to death. We are here tonight to say this must end.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. After a dramatic Friday began with the Republican-led Judiciary Committee planning to approve Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and ended with a pause for a week-long FBI investigation into Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's claims that Kavanaugh tried to rape her in high school, Democrats are now focused on how the probe is being handled. President Trump ordered the FBI investigation Friday after Republican Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona surprised his colleagues on the Senate Judiciary Committee by agreeing to advance Kavanaugh's nomination only if an investigation took place. The committee voted 11-10 in favor of Kavanaugh's Supreme Court confirmation for a full Senate vote after the FBI investigation concludes. Top Democrat on the committee, Senator Dianne Feinstein of California, is now asking that the White House and the FBI provide Trump's written directive ordering the investigation into Kavanaugh. The New York Times reports the FBI's limited supplemental background check could be finished as early as Monday morning. It says the FBI was directed by the White House and Senate Republicans to interview just 4 people: Kavanaugh's high school friends, Mark Judge and P.J. Smith, Dr. Christine Blasey Ford's high school friend, Leland Kaiser, and another Kavanaugh accuser, Deborah Ramirez. 3 women have come forward to accuse Brett Kavanaugh of sexual misconduct. He's denied all of the sexual assault allegations against him. As of Sunday, the lawyer for Dr. Blasey Ford, Deborah Katz, told reporters she had not been contacted by the FBI despite repeated efforts to speak with them. The lawyer for Julie Swetnick, the 3rd woman who's accused Kavanaugh of excessive drinking and inappropriate treatment of women in the early 80s, said Saturday she has not been contacted by the FBI either. The New Yorker magazine reports the FBI has failed to follow up with several individuals who want to speak to the FBI. In a tweet Sunday afternoon, Trump pushed back on criticism of the FBI investigation, writing, quote, "Wow, just starting to hear the Democrats who are only thinking obstruct and delay are starting to put out the word that the time and scope of FBI looking into Judge Kavanaugh and witnesses is not enough. Hello. For them, it will never be enough. Stay tuned and watch." Trump spoke to reporters over the weekend.
Having the FBI go out, do a thorough investigation, whether it's 3 days or 7 days, I think it's going to be less than a week. But having them do a thorough investigation, I actually think will be a blessing in disguise. It'll be a good thing. I'll see you in... Do
you have a backup plan for Mr. Kavanaugh? Do you have a backup plan, sir?
I don't have any backup. I don't need a backup plan.
On Saturday, Senator Bernie Sanders called for the FBI to investigate whether Kavanaugh committed perjury while testifying under oath at various times in the past, including Thursday. Sanders said in a letter to committee chair Chuck Grassley, quote, "A fundamental question the FBI can help answer is whether Judge Kavanaugh has been truthful with the committee. This goes to the very heart of whether he should be confirmed to the court," unquote. Well, we begin today's show with one of the 2 women credited with delaying Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation. Republican Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona was on his way to cast his vote in the Senate Judiciary Committee shortly after announcing his intentions to vote yes for Trump's Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh when he was confronted by 2 women who are sexual assault survivors in an elevator. The women held the door open, telling Flake through their tears he was dismissing their pain. This is one of them, Ana Maria Archila.
Senator Flake, do you think that Brett Kavanaugh is telling the truth?
Thank you.
Do you think that he's able to hold the pain of this country and repair it? That is the work of justice. The way that justice works is you recognize harm, you take responsibility for it, and then you begin to repair it. You're allowing someone who is unwilling to take responsibility for his own actions, unwilling to hold the harm that he has done to one woman, actually 3 women and repair it. You are allowing someone who is unwilling to take responsibility for his own actions
respond
to sit in the higher court of the country and to have the role of repairing the harm that has been done in this country to many people. No, thank you. What do you think?
Senator, do you care to respond?
Ma'am, do you want to talk to his staff right out here?
No, I want to talk to him. Don't talk to me. What do you think? I understand, but tell me, I'm standing right here in front of you. What do you have? Do you think that he's telling the truth? No. Do you think that he's telling the truth to the country?
You have power when so many women are powerless.
Thank you.
Can you not give them an answer,
we have our press available to talk to you guys if you want.
You just released a press statement. You don't have the courage to give them an answer?
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Care to respond?
So you can either come in or out. Thank you.
Saying thank you is not an answer.
Okay,
this is about the future of our country, sir.
That was Ana Maria Archila. This is Maria Gallagher, who also confronted Senator Flake next to her as he was in the elevator right before his vote on the Senate Judiciary Committee.
I was sexually assaulted and nobody believed me. I didn't tell anyone, and you're telling all women that they don't matter, that they should just stay quiet because if they tell you what happened to them, you're going to ignore them. That's what happened to me, and that's what you're telling all women in America, that they don't matter. They should just keep it to themselves because if they have told the truth, you're just going to help that man to power anyway. That's what you're telling all of these women. That's what you're telling me right now. Look at me when I'm talking to you. You're telling me that my assault doesn't matter, that what happened to me doesn't matter, and that you're going to let people who do these things into power. That's what you're telling me when you vote for him. Don't look away from me. Look at me and tell me that it doesn't matter what happened to me, that you'll let people like that go into the highest court of the land and tell everyone what they can do to their bodies.
Do you have an answer, Senator?
That was Maria Gallagher, along with Ana Maria Archila, the 2 women who confronted Senator Flake on Friday. Shortly afterwards, in a stunning reversal, Senator Flake announced to his colleagues on the committee that he was calling to delay the vote on the Senate floor, though he did vote for confirmation of Kavanaugh in the Senate Judiciary Committee. The vote was 11-10 down party lines.
I have been speaking with a number of people on the other side. We've had conversations ongoing for a while with regard to making sure that we do due diligence here. And I think it would be proper to delay the floor vote for up to, but not more than 1 week, in order to let the FBI continue to do an investigation limited in time and scope to the current allegations that are there, and limited in time to no more than 1 week. And I will vote to advance the bill to the floor with that understanding.
Well, for more, we're joined here in our New York studio by Ana Maria Archila, one of the 2 women who confronted Senator Flake. She is co-executive director of the Center for Popular Democracy. She confronted Flake with fellow sexual assault survivor and activist Maria Gallagher, and she wrote about her experience in a USA Today column headlined, I confronted Jeff Flake over Brett Kavanaugh. Survivors like me won't stand for injustice. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you so much.
So tell us about Friday morning.
Friday morning, I was getting ready to head back home after being in Washington, D.C. for many days with hundreds of people that had traveled to D.C. to protest the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh, people who have healthcare stories and who stand to lose their healthcare, survivors of sexual assault, workers, women, people from across the country. And I showed up to the Senate atrium, the building of the heart, the atrium of the Senate building, and at around 8:30, and met Maria Gallagher, who was there for the first time, someone who just felt the calling to show up and support those who were protesting. And we had time, so she said, well, someone said I should go to Senator Flake's office, and we did. I had been in front of Senator Flake's office on Monday, and it was the first time that I had decided to tell my story of survival. And it seemed important to me to go back and try to talk to him. I did not think that we were going to find him. I did not think that we were really going to be able to have this interaction with him. But I'm an organizer, and I know that we have to fight the fight up until the very last minute. That's how we exercise power together.
And he had just issued his statement.
Our reaction, the reaction that people are seeing in the elevator, is the reaction of Maria and I just finding out that he issued a statement and he was ready to vote for Brett Kavanaugh, even after hearing the very powerful and gut-wrenching testimony of Dr. Blasey Ford, who stood in front of him and all the Republican men and the Democratic senators to share her story because she felt compelled as a citizen, she felt compelled to share her story to protect her country. I felt compelled to share my story, to join her in solidarity, and also to protect my children. I am deadly afraid that Brett Kavanaugh will roll back decades of progress in our country on women's rights, on civil rights, on LGBTQ equality, and I do not want my children to have fewer rights than I have right now.
So explain what happened when he went into the elevator or when you spotted him.
There were some reporters standing around the door of his office. They spotted him first, and they ran behind him. Maria and I ran behind them. And
you didn't know Maria before?
I did not know Maria. We had just met. I didn't know her story. She was telling me that it was her first time trying to talk to an elected official. So I was giving her tips, like, you can share your story, tell them why you're there. We just ran into the elevator and I just put our foot in the door as it was closing and then just stayed there. And the adrenaline of running behind him, the fact that we knew that we just had a few minutes, we used those minutes in the best way we could. I think, without really explicitly talking about it, we were really demanding a connection. We were really asking him to be there in that moment and feel the pain and the rage that women across the country and survivors across the country are feeling right now.
And so you told him you were sexually assaulted.
I said to him, Senator Flake, just a few days ago, I stood in front of your office and for the first time shared my story of sexual assault. I did it because I recognized myself, my own experience in Dr. Ford's testimony, and I want to know what message are you sending to your children and my children? Do you think are you comfortable with the idea of putting someone who's been accused of sexual assault in the Supreme Court for the next 50 years and for both of our children to grow up in that country?
So you were also just publicly talking about your sexual assault, and you have national cameras on you. Had you told your family yet?
I had not told my father. So immediately after that interaction, I texted him and I said, you're going to hear something that we haven't talked about. I want you to know that I am okay. And the reason why I didn't tell him for more than 30 years is because I didn't want him to feel pain. I didn't want him to feel like he didn't protect me. It's the same reason it took me many years, more than 10 years, before I told my mother. That fear that I had as a child was confirmed. The thing that my father texted back was, I'm so sorry, I was not able to protect you. So I know that we don't tell our stories because we are often confused, ashamed, feel responsible, and are afraid to cause pain to the people that love us.
Which is one of the answers to why Christine Ford hasn't told her story for all of these decades.
That's exactly right. I want to say, lots of people are asking me, do you think that you changed, Senator Flake's mind? And I think if it had just been Maria and I in that elevator, and if he had just heard that for the first time, the story of someone from the first time, I do not think that he would have changed his vote. I think it was the cumulative effect of thousands and thousands of people pouring going through this incredibly painful experience to try to change the culture, to bring into existence a new country, a country where we are not constantly ignoring, disbelieving, doubting the truthfulness and the value of women, of our stories, of our voices, a country where we're not relegated to, experiencing not just sexual violence, but political violence by being and economic violence. So I think all of us are doing this incredible kind of labor of love, of telling our stories, and through that pain, bringing a new country into existence. And that's really what's happening right now. So
Senator Flake left you at that point.
Yes.
And voted in the Senate Judiciary Committee to confirm Judge Kavanaugh as a Supreme Court justice. So it was 11-10 party line vote. Where were you when you heard this? And then when you heard that he said he would not vote yes again, where it counts on the Senate floor, unless there was an FBI investigation?
I was in the same kind of atrium of the Senate building where I had met Maria. When I heard both of those events, I was not close to a TV screen. I wasn't watching the events as they were unfolding. I was hearing reports from people that were watching it. And at both points, I was, kind of surprised and shocked, and reminded that really, people, it's that if we sit back and allow events to unfold by themselves, we give up all of our power. The nomination of Brett Kavanaugh was a given at the beginning of the summer. And everybody assumed this was going to happen without any snag. And I think people who know that they were going to lose their health care, women who knew that our rights were at stake, said, well, we still have to fight. And it was that spirit of we still have to do whatever we can to try to stop it that brought Maria and I to that building.
No matter what happens, you've changed history.
I hope that we really change history, all of us, everyone that's watching today, by showing up this week. I think we have an opportunity to change history. I want to make sure that we don't sit back and allow the FBI to resolve, to be the deciding factor in who gets nominated to the Supreme Court. The court works for us. We all, in the same way that we're asking senators to take these decision to take this responsibility very seriously, I want to ask people in this country to take this moment very seriously. Call your senators. If you're near Washington, D.C., come to Washington, D.C., show up at the Hart Senate building every day this week at 9 o'clock. Come to a rally that's going to happen at noon on Thursday in D.C.
You are a true organizer. I think the media denigrates activists. They will often say someone came for the first time of her own volition. She'd never protested before. And I think implicit in that are that there are what they call professional activists. You are the co-executive director of the Center for Popular Democracy.
That's right.
Talk about what that means, popular democracy.
I think popular democracy is both what we aspire this country to be. The people at the Center for Popular Democracy, the people who are showing up for the first time, the people who have been showing up for years, all of us share this idea that democracy is not a spectator sport, that it is that we breathe life into it every time that we engage, and that it belongs to us. Is the way is both our protective shield in some ways against corporate power, but it is also the way in which we express our love for each other and our willingness to take care of each other. So that's both of those ideas are what why popular democracy is the thing that my organization is trying to inspire people to participate in.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being with us. What would you like to see the FBI act ask? What questions do you feel need to be answered? And the issue of the number of people who've said they want to talk to the FBI who have not been contacted yet. President Trump says they have 1 week, and the investigation is very limited.
Mm-hmm. I want to make sure that the women who were so courageous and came out in public to share their experience of Brett Kavanaugh get a full hearing, that the FBI really does everything in its power to understand their stories. I want to make sure that the investigation also reaches into all the people that were around Brett Kavanaugh at that time. I think the country deserves and we desperately need people to have trust in the court. But again, I don't want us to just give up our power and wait for the FBI to resolve these questions. I want all of us to, I want to build all of us to become a legion of elevator women across the country. Let's make sure that they look at us. Let's show up and say, look at me. Look at me. That's what social movements are made of. Look at me.
Well, Ana Maria Archila, you've clearly redefined elevator music. Ana Maria Archila is co-executive director of the Center for Popular Democracy. She, along with Maria Gallagher, confronted Republican Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona in an elevator just before he was to vote in the Senate Judiciary Committee, right after he announced he was going to support Judge Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court. Shortly after the confrontation, Senator Flake did vote to confirm Judge Kavanaugh, but he said he would not vote yes again unless there was an FBI investigation. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, Lisa Graves joins us to talk about what that investigation should look like and what are the parameters that are being placed on that. Stay with us.
If you don't like who's in there, vote them out. That's what Election Day is all about. And the biggest gun we got is called the ballot box. If you don't like who's in there, vote them out. Vote them out. Vote them out. And when they're gone, we'll sing and dance and shout. And she'll bring some new ones in, and they will start the show again. And if you don't like who's in there, vote them out.
Willie Nelson premiering his new song, Vote 'Em Out, at a rally in Austin, Texas on Saturday for Democratic Senate hopeful Beto O'Rourke, who is challenging incumbent Republican Senator Ted Cruz. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. The FBI is continuing its reopened investigation into Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and allegations made by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford that Kavanaugh attempted to rape her in 1982. But Democrats say the FBI's probe is too limited. Critics say Kavanaugh committed perjury, lying during his testimony. A friend of Kavanaugh's from Yale has accused him of lying about his drinking habits in college. In testimony, sworn testimony, Charles Ludington said, quote, "When Brett got drunk, he was often belligerent and aggressive. On one of the last occasions I purposely socialized with Brett, I witnessed him respond to a semi-hostile remark, not by diffusing the situation, but by throwing his beer in the man's face and starting a fight that ended with one of our mutual friends in jail," unquote. A number of Kavanaugh's classmates at Yale have made similar remarks about Kavanaugh's drinking. A group of alumni from Kavanaugh's all-male high school, Georgetown Prep, has issued a call for fellow graduates to come forward if they have information about any sexual assaults possibly committed by the Supreme Court nominee, saying in a petition, please do not remain silent, even if speaking out comes at some personal cost. Well, for more, we go to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Lisa Graves, co-director of Documented, which investigates corporate influence on democracy. Lisa, welcome back to Democracy Now! Can you talk about What is the scope of this FBI investigation? President Trump says it will only be a week. The White House controls this, though the information is given to the Senate. Explain who's being talked to, who's not. The New Yorker is reporting that the third woman who accused Brett Kavanaugh, Julie Swetnick, has not been contacted, though Debbie Ramirez, his Yale classmate who says he pushed his genitals in her face, his naked genitals, she has been contacted.
Well, I think we're seeing a lot of conflicting reports, but it's very troubling what's emerging. What we saw on Friday after the elevator confrontation was an agreement between Democrats and Republicans that there would be actual due diligence, that there would be an investigation into the allegations against Brett Kavanaugh. And that would, of course, include interviewing the witnesses, Dr. Ford and the other two women. It would also include interviewing people whose evidence, whose testimony could support them or not support them. It would also include interviewing Brett Kavanaugh by the FBI. What we're hearing is that the White House counsel, McGahn, has somehow put limits on who the FBI can interview and made it a very small number of people. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. That's not the way these supplemental background investigations proceed, and it's not a real investigation. If it turns out that that's what's happened, that they've tried to whitewash this by interviewing only a couple of people, justice will not be served, and this will be basically a whitewash. Senator Feinstein has requested more information about the scope of the interviews, but quite frankly, I don't even think we should be having that sort of debate. What happened on Friday was a recognition that more needs to be known about Brett Kavanaugh before he is given this sort of lifetime position. I think there's ample evidence that he lied. I think he lied in his testimony on Thursday. But, you know, the FBI should not be constrained by whatever limits the White House wants to impose, because the White House wants to get Brett Kavanaugh on the court. In fact, if the White House had its way, he'd be confirmed today.
Lisa, you've said that we shouldn't be talking about false accusations, but false denials. You said he lied on Thursday. Judge Kavanaugh lied on Thursday under oath. Explain.
I think that, well, two parts of that. One is, you know, the conversation nationally in some parts has been on this notion that women make false accusations. That's exceedingly rare. The actual probability in our country, just based on history, and recent history in particular as well, is that when men are accused of attempted rape, of sexual harassment, they deny it. They falsely deny it. That's the norm. That's what usually happens. Sometimes they falsely deny it with anger. Sometimes they falsely deny it through lawyers. But that's usually what happens. Women come forward bravely, tell their stories, and men deny it. And that's what we saw on Friday. The statement of Brett Kavanaugh was appalling. The idea that he would attack those senators for daring to investigate a credible allegation of attempted rape is absurd. And in fact, it's more than a credible allegation. What we saw was compelling, consistent eyewitness testimony from Dr. Ford. That should be fully credited. What Brett Kavanaugh offered was anger. Anger isn't evidence of innocence. It's certainly not evidence that refutes the consistent and compelling testimony of Dr. Ford. And in fact, what you saw Brett Kavanaugh do was dissemble yet again about his history, about his drinking history, about his yearbook, about even the statements of people who have been asked about the incident, claiming that the other people who she says were there, denied it. In fact, most of them said they didn't remember it, which is fully consistent with her statement. It wasn't significant for them. It was significant for her. But that's not the only time in which Brett Kavanaugh lied. He, I believe, lied in his earlier testimony in 2004, in 2006, and earlier this month about a number of matters, including his role in receiving stolen confidential information. Information was stolen from the United States Senate about judicial nominations, and lying about his role in those judicial nominations. I think that this man, Brett Kavanaugh, tells lies big and small. He's unfit for the bench. He's certainly unfit for the United States Supreme Court. And I've called for him to be impeached, not promoted, but actually impeached.
So you're saying, you're talking about impeach right now as a federal court judge.
What I'm saying is that I think that should be the conversation. I think that there's ample evidence for the House to begin an investigation. Impeachment would begin in the House, not the Senate. That's the procedure under our Constitution. I don't know how long that sort of inquiry would take, but there's certainly ample evidence that Brett Kavanaugh has been untruthful to the Senate, that he's lied under oath, that he's misled the Senate. every single time he's testified, he has testified falsely, in my view. His statements have been contradicted by evidence in 2004, 2006, earlier this month in 2018, and just this past week.
And I want to get to those issues that you've raised before. You were a top aide to Senator Leahy when you're talking about you believe Brett Kavanaugh, ultimately when he was brought before the Senate, lied about information he got about judicial nominations when he worked for George W. Bush. I'd like you to stay after the show. We'll do a post-show and post it online at democracynow.org under web exclusives. Lisa Graves, co-director of Documented, which investigates corporate influence on democracy. She's the former chief counsel for nominations for the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee at the time, Senator Leahy. This is Democracy Now! In 30 seconds, we'll be speaking with Kimberly Crenshaw and be looking at parallels between Clarence Thomas and Brett Kavanaugh. Stay with us.
Well, I'm tough, as drunk as I can be. Oh, well, I'm tough, as drunk as I can be. Well, now my head is as ragged as a hair comb with no teeth. Oh, well, I went and got my paycheck, I was on my way home. Well, I went and got my paycheck, I was on my way home.
Tore Up by legendary blues guitarist Otis Rush. Rush died Saturday at the age of 84. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Our next guest argues, when senators questioned Dr. Blasey Ford last week, they showed they'd failed to learn from Anita Hill's 1991 testimony against Clarence Thomas. But first, I want to play some of the testimony from both confirmation hearings. President Trump's Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh testifying Thursday before the Senate Judiciary Committee that he did not sexually assault Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. Then Clarence Thomas testifying he did not sexually harass Hill.
This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit. Revenge on behalf of the Clintons and millions of dollars in money from outside left-wing opposition groups. This is a circus.
This is a circus. It's a national disgrace. As far as I'm concerned, it is a high-tech lynching for uppity blacks who in any way deign to think for themselves.
For more, we go to Los Angeles, where we're joined by Kimberly Crenshaw, professor of law at UCLA and Columbia University. She's the founder of the African American Policy Forum. She assisted Anita Hill's legal team. Her piece for the New York Times last week was headlined, "We Still Haven't Learned from Anita Hill's Testimony." So welcome to Democracy Now!, Professor Crenshaw. This is now after the testimony of Dr. Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh. Your assessment of it?
Well, my assessment is that both parties learned a lesson about optics, but not much about substance. I thought that the fact that the Republicans realized that they could not themselves be in the position of interrogating Dr. Ford and therefore outsource that responsibility to someone else was a reflection of their understanding. I also think that the Democrats truly understood that one of the things that went so wrong in the last hearing was that Anita Hill had no support. There was no indication whatsoever that the Democrats actually believed her. And, of course, the Republicans pretty much raked her over the coals. So we didn't have either of those things happening this time. But I think what we still found out is that there's a huge lack of balance between the discursive capital, the ability to speak and be taken seriously between men and women, and then also between whites and non-whites. So those who have more power have a broader range of possibilities. So Kavanaugh can go in and pretty much lose his mind, and people think that he's still credible, whereas Dr. Ford had to walk a very, very narrow line to be found to be credible. And even after she was found to be credible, I mean, to the extent that even Fox News was saying, oh, we think the Republicans are in trouble, there was just a brief pause, And then Kavanaugh comes in and sheds his tears, and suddenly we're back to square one again. Last week, Kate Mann called that himpathy, where men have more, powerful men have more, and I think this is effectively what we saw playing out.
I wanted to go to Dianne Feinstein. Controversy over the confirmation of Clarence Thomas at the Supreme Court triggered a wave that swept Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein of California into office in 1992, among other women. And that was a year after that confirmation. Now Senator Feinstein's a key player in Kavanaugh's confirmation as the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. She noted Thursday the FBI carried an investigation into Anita Hill's allegations that Thomas had sexually harassed her.
In 1991, Anita Hill's allegations were reviewed by the FBI, as is the normal process and squarely within its jurisdiction. In 1991, the Senate heard from 22 witnesses over 3 days. Today, while rejecting an FBI investigation, Republicans are refusing to hear testimony from any other witness, including Mark Judge, who Dr. Ford identified as being in the room when the attack took place. In 1991, Republicans belittled Professor Hill's experience, saying, and I quote, "It won't make a bit of difference in the outcome," end quote. And the burden of proof was on Professor Hill. Today, our Republican colleagues are saying this is a hiccup. Dr. Ford is mixed up and declaring, "I'll listen to the lady, but we're going to bring this to a close."
So that was Senator Dianne Feinstein during the hearing. This is Anita Hill making her opening statement in 1991 confirmation hearings for Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas when she testified that he sexually harassed her.
After approximately 3 months of working there, he asked me to go out socially with him. What happened next and telling the world about it are the two most difficult experiences of my life. It is only after a great deal of agonizing consideration and great number of sleepless nights that I am able to talk of these unpleasant matters to anyone but my close friends.
So that was 1991. Speaking in Houston Friday night at an event where cameras were not allowed, Anita Hill noted she'd watched Dr. Blasey Ford testify and, quote, "I was struck by the doctor's openness to say how terrified she was to be there and talk about something that had had a profound impact and knowing there would be hostility. I was also impressed by how calm she was, how careful she was, and how it affected her," Anita Hill said Friday. Describing Kavanaugh's testimony, she noted he had projected anger, a lot of aggression, and that, quote, "no female candidate for a Supreme Court position would ever have the license to speak with similar fury." Professor Crenshaw, you walked in with Anita Hill to her hearing. You accompanied her. So talk about the parallels now. And this point that Professor Hill also made, that if you were to reverse the disposition of these two people, the rage, the anger, the evasiveness, the attacking judge, if that were Christine Blasey Ford and Christine Blasey and Kavanaugh was apologetic, soft-spoken, cooperative. I mean, could you imagine if Dr. Ford acted like Judge Kavanaugh did at the hearing?
Well, it's absolutely unimaginable, and that's the deeper reality behind sexual harassment, sexual abuse, gender injustice. It's not just the acts that happen. It's the broader context in which men have far more power not only to create harm, but to deny responsibility for the harm they create. And then equally importantly, I think that we see happening right now is when they are called to be accountable for what they've done, when something that happened 27 years ago, perhaps in a context in which Kavanaugh didn't think that there was any social sanction to have to worry about, ultimately catches up with him, what we get is the righteous indignation, the raging, the finger pointing, the blaming of so many people. Now, the real problem isn't just that there is room for him to do that, but that his doing that is effective. So many people thinking that, well, of course we understand that level of rage. So overlooking, basically stepping over Dr. Blasey Ford's trauma in a rush to embrace him. That's the part about this moment that's so frightening. We've seen this kind of anger playing out in the stadiums that President Trump is going to. And I think a lot of us can distance ourselves from that because we don't see it moving into the halls of power. Well, this kind of sentiment, my aggression is justified by my self-defense, even though I'm defending against being held accountable for something that I've done. That's come now into the Senate, it's come to the Judiciary Committee, and it may be going into the Supreme Court. This is a very dangerous moment for our society and for our democracy, and it's important to try to draw the line in the sand at this very moment.
Now, you wrote in the end of a piece for the New York Times that the Hill-Thomas conflict has gone down in history as a colossal failure of intersectional organizing. You say it's not too late as the Kavanaugh nomination fight enters its next phase to write a better history. Explain.
Well, my argument there was that one of the reasons why Clarence Thomas was so successful in galvanizing so many African Americans, members of the civil rights community, with his denunciation of this as a high-tech lynching, is because people didn't understand that the history of sexual harassment actually came from African American women. It was part of the civil rights freedom struggle. So not knowing that history put feminists and anti-racists at odds, and that created this huge intersectional failure that led to the confirmation of Clarence Thomas. I think we have a similar opportunity to get it better and get it right this time, but we have to be able to change our framework. Right now, the real struggle is to try to make it clear that the claims that Kavanaugh is making, the attempt to rally the family, circle around the endangered now white male, with all of the dog whistles all the way to the bullhorn that you heard there. I worked hard. I didn't get a handout. All the way to Graham basically saying what's really going on. I'm a single white man and I'm not going to shut up anymore. We don't have to look hard to see what the claims that are being made here really are. So now the challenge is for women of all races, but especially white women, who recognize in Brett Kavanaugh that rageful response of someone who's being held accountable, who heard in Dr. Blasey Ford a truth, to resist the appeal to now gather around and protect him. I think that is the new moment for intersectionality, to really denounce this use of whiteness, maleness, and power, the intersection of power, and to say we deserve better than this.
Do you believe Kavanaugh will be confirmed?
I think that one of my lessons that I learned from the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill situation, we were in the senators' offices on that last day, and everybody was saying that they had the votes, and we knew for a fact that they didn't. So this is going to go down to the wire. Every effort to contact all of the senators, and especially those who may be leaning in the direction of no, should happen until the very last vote is cast.
Kimberly Crenshaw, we want to thank you for being with us, professor of law at UCLA and Columbia University and founder of the African American Policy Forum. We'll link to your column in the New York Times headline, "We Still Haven't Learned from Anita Hill's Testimony." And that does it for our show. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Renee Felks, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Tammy Warnoff, Sam Alkoff. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.